This is Groundeffected. My name is your dad, and welcome to walking around all day with your fly open. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how I painted Regis, who is some kind of character, but basically looks like Frodo. Doesn't really matter. If you like painting, you like 3D printing, you like model making, watch the video, give it a like, leave some words in the bottom square thing that YouTube allows you to leave some words in, and when you're done with that, click the subscribe button and carry on watching the video. There is nothing new in this video. I'm starting again with a black primer base coat, and this is just because it's so much easier to build off of black. When you leave black in the crevices, it means you don't have to go in and hide all the shadows because you didn't paint them and blah de blah de blah. So basically, just use a black primer if you want to be lazy and don't have to paint every single micromillimeter of the model. And by lazy, I don't really mean that you're not going to have to do it, because you're still going to have to do it. But if you happen to miss one tiny little gap, you probably won't notice it because you used black and you said, "Thank you, Mr. Groundeffected. Thank you so much for showing me that I should use black, because even though the coverage is more difficult over the top of it, at least when I made a mistake, you can't really see that I missed a spot." Also, I never spoke a single thing about how to paint this little base, which is a bit bad. I use a couple of colors. I've done rocks before in many different videos, so really I just take a load of colors, throw them onto the base, smush them about together until it makes some kind of naturalish looking color gradation, so that it's not just a robot hand putting color in one place, color in another place, and trying to very carefully blend them together, because I find that doesn't come out looking natural enough. You need to just slap at it and just friggin' go like you don't even care, and it will look more natural and even better. I use dry brushing techniques to bring out some of the edges on the rock. I also use an airbrush with a little bit of a wash in it. I don't wash the rock directly. Sometimes I do if I want depth in it, but most of the time what I'll do is I'll just airbrush the shadows a little bit darker where I want them, and I'll kind of let it blend out where I don't really want it to be too dark. It's pretty simple really. It's a great way of adding some extra color to your base, especially if you're painting a rock. About that moss that I was painting, literally I just use a dark green, I use a slightly lighter green, and then I use an even lighter green after that, and I just stipple it on. It's really easy. There is some glow on the base coming from the mushrooms that are on it, and in order to create that, I used a blue technical paint. Can't even name what this paint is because it's just so crazy. I will try anyway. It's called ROXY, and that is from Citadel Paints, and the reason why I use it is because it was blue and I needed blue at the time, and it worked out for me. On these mushrooms, they are a little bit different to the ones I've done previously. The client this time asked me to change the color of the mushrooms. He didn't really want to just go with the same red and white mushrooms that I've been doing in the last few statues that I'd painted for him. So I gave it an orange color with purple spots and a blue highlight. How about that? There is a satchel that this dude carries. It is his man bag, and basically I just sprayed a brown over the top, coming from the top where the light direction is, leaving some of that black underneath as a shadow. I did this for other parts, including the sword and also his pants, because I felt like they needed to have a little bit of brown in them. I don't really know why, but I also realized that they weren't supposed to be too brown, because that's a boring color. So I came back with this kind of like grayish color, and I put that straight over the top. What this did was created a highlight, but it also changed the tone of the pants so they weren't just dark brown. But the other thing that this did was it allowed me to use a wash over the top so I could create more depth. The staff that the dude is holding is gold, so I painted that gold. I then also needed to work on his boots. I kept them black as a primer, and I just airbrushed a grey over the top. Now of course I used a greyish color on his pants, so I needed to make sure that these weren't two of the exact same greys. Once I was done with giving them a good old zenithal with grey, I then used a black wash and I sprayed that pretty much from the bottom of the boot. All that this does really is it smooths out the gradation. With the lighter color, what you will find, especially grays or whites or anything that's got a white in it really, you will find that it won't be super smooth. You might have a couple of little specks and it's not crispy enough. So in order to smooth that out, I use washes to kind of blend the edges between those. I then used a panel liner and I went in and I laid that into all the little cracks around the boots and just around the sole itself, just to create a bit more depth and something more interesting to look at. I took the same nickel oxide paint from Citadel and I sprayed that all underneath where the mushrooms were going, basically to kind of give it a look as if they were glowing themselves. I wasn't going full OSL because it's a large statue. I don't really know how I'm going to approach that without it looking dumb, especially being so big. It's going to be a lot harder to cheat and make it look like light, but it still kind of looks like light. I then started working on the skin tones for this dude, and basically I just try to make him look like Frodo. Really, at the end of the day, the picture I was given, he looks like Frodo. I'm sorry to say this, my dude, Mr. Man who commissioned me. It's not Frodo, but he looks just like Frodo if Frodo were playing dress up as a Dungeons and Dragons character. So I painted him exactly like Frodo. What you may notice is that I slightly changed the order of the paints that I used. I actually changed one of the colors that I used, and that was because I'm running out very fast with Fairy Flesh set, and unfortunately you can't buy each color on their own. And if you can, you need to let me know where I can do this, because currently I'm buying full sets just to replace one color, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people are doing that too, which is going to be very frustrating since this is one of the best sets to use to paint white dudes, bruh, and black dudes and other dudes. In fact, actually, it's a very versatile set. So Vallejo, please, can you release these as singular paints? And if you have already, can you just leave a comment and tell me where to get them from, because that would be friggin' helpful. Working on his hair, I just threw down a layer of Sargor Brown. Basically, this is just a good base coat. The nice thing about using a really dark color like this is that it frames up the face very nicely, and also it gives me a good place to build up from. Basically, this is the shadows of the hair, and I can then start building on top of that, and it will give me shadow for free. Kind of like using a black base coat, but it's not black, it's brown this time. I went back in with a couple of lighter skin tones just to highlight some of the high spots, like some of the areas that would really stand out. And while that stuff was all drying, I went back onto the staff and I threw down a wash all into all the crevices. Then it was time to work on my dude's amazing coat, and basically it's green with blue sleeves. So I started out with blue, imagine that, and I felt like it was going to be so much easier to just paint the blue on his sleeves and then work my way around it by masking those off, and it pretty much worked, so that's a good thing. Also, I really didn't like the blue that I put down. I felt like it wasn't blue enough and it felt a little bit too green to me, so what I did was I added real blue on top of it, and this made it look a little bit more blue, which is quite uncanny because, you know, I put blue on top of it. While that stuff was all drying, because of course I had now laid down a load of paint and I wanted to mask that off, I went back onto some of the accessories and I basically just base coated all the wooden parts and the little wrap that goes around his staff. But once I was done with that, I was able to come back and start masking out the arms. And how I did this was just by using masking tape to mask off as much as I could possibly get to with the masking tape. And once I'd got that all pressed down and sitting in its place, I took a Vallejo liquid mask and I painted. Don't think you could actually call it painting because it's a rubber tipped sculpting tool that I use. So I used that to imitate some form of painting with this mask, and the reason why I use that is because it's so much easier to clean that afterwards. Trust me, I've been saying use a brush before. That was because I was like okay with throwing away the brush after. I'm now no longer okay with throwing the brush away because I was going through a lot of brushes. Just buy one of these sculpting tools and you will be able to brush liquid mask for days. Obviously, once the mask had dried and it was ready to paint, I did the work that I needed to do on the rest of the skirt tunic coat thingy jobs, and that was basically just a green. Again, I used the black as my shadows. I sprayed the green over the top. I added a slight highlight to that. I also used a bit of blue actually from the shadows just to create some more depth, and also so that it wasn't just so bland, because again, black is a desaturated color and blue is not desaturated. So throwing blue tint over the black brings a bit more saturation back into the piece. Whilst everything was drying, I was able to work on certain parts of the suit, namely like some of the details around the bottom of the skirt and also his belt. For the belt, I literally just used Old Rust from Ammo by Mig. This is fast becoming one of my favorite browns. I can't tell you why, but it's super versatile. I can go darker with it, I can go lighter with it. It has a lovely rich color and it's not boring poo brown. Working on his satchel, I needed to add some of the details to it, so I used a really bright red to paint in some of the triangles, as well as a really bright blue to paint in the opposite end of those triangles. And pretty much doing stuff like this is just a matter of trying to work out the correct steps to do it. This will just make your life so much easier if you actually sit and think about what order to do the steps in. This way you don't really have to worry about covering up work that you've already done. I used gold to paint the little symbol in the center and the little knob thing that keeps it closed. There was this really crazy emblem on the sword, and by crazy I mean not that crazy, but crazy enough that I had to practically freehand most of it. And what I did was I pretty much just made up a plan in my mind of how I was going to do it. There is like blue edge highlighting and all sorts of weird things going on, but if you look at what I'm doing, I'm just setting up so that I don't actually fail. I don't really know how else to explain this to you, but I thought about each color, which one is going to be easier to go over which other one. Really, if you think about it, blue is going to cover red a lot easier than red is going to cover blue. So I decided to use blue as my last color. It was also the color that I would need to be the most precise with, and this is why I decided to do it at the end, and it pretty much worked out. I'm not gonna lie, putting in the dead little straight lines in the center of this thing kind of scared me a bit, but using a really small brush and good flowing paints, it goes down pretty easy and it's not as intimidating as it seems once you get started. I threw down Old Rust over the handle and then I dry brushed that a little bit, and I came back with some black around the edge just to kind of highlight some of the metal pieces that are around the hilt of this. Is it even a sword at this point? If he's a small person, then that's not even a sword, right? He's just got a knife. Basically, it's not a sword. Cool, I'm no longer calling it a sword. If we have to paint the sword again, I will just be talking about it as a knife because it's really confusing my brain. Let's stop getting sidetracked and get straight back into I'm painting now on the little medallion things that he's got. The one that I'm holding is one that's separate because there are two different hands for this guy. The guy who commissioned it wanted to have a version where there could be a chain going through the medallion and another version where he was holding the medallion in his hand. So there are two versions of it, and at some point you might be confused as to why the medallion is in the hand and not out the hand, and this is why I gave you this information. Going back to the tunic thing, I painted in some of the details, starting again with the blue. Again, this is a situation of trying to figure out how to paint these in the correct order so that it doesn't really mess up your flow, especially trying to put certain colors on later. Realistically, I would have loved to have put the pink before the blue and then the blue around it, but that would have been really difficult to actually place the blue in place without honestly being super difficult to get it in there. There was a bit more trimming that I did. Unfortunately, I forgot to film that part, but if you don't tell anyone, I won't tell anyone. Working on his eyes, I used my newer technique of painting eyes, which is a black base coat, then I place a pink in the lower portion of the eye, and then I shape the eye with a white, which again is not actually white, it's just a really white looking highlight skin color from Fairy Flesh set, which I wish was separate but isn't separate. Please, Vallejo, please. Going back to that medallion, the ruby in the center, I highlighted with vermilion across the middle of it. I basically just gave it a bit of a gradation just so that it looks somewhat gem-like, and I gave it a good clear coat so that it looked nice and shiny. Working on its eyes, I placed in a dark brown as the first color and I let that dry. Once I was sure that the eyes were in the right place, I then used desert yellow, which will help to create a sort of hazel looking eye. His eyes are still going to be brown like, but this desert yellow does give off a hazel kind of color, especially once it starts to blend up a little bit with the browns underneath. Once that had dried, I gave him his pupils, I gave him a highlight in those eyeballs, and that's where I called the model done. I hope that you managed to pick something out of this video that will help you paint your next model or 3D print or whatever it is that you're working on. And of course, if it did, make sure to leave some words of assistance to the algorithm in the little square below, because we know this is what we need in order for growth of the YouTube channel. Now I would like to say a super special thank you to my Patreons, and of course we managed to get another Patreon this week, and for that I would like to say thank you, Briam Paco. Thank you, my dude. It is because of you that I'm able to keep these lights blinding my eyeballs and keep these videos happening. So now that I've been settled in the new studio for a couple of days, things are gonna start changing a bit. I've noticed I need to do some stuff with sound and lights and all sorts of things, but I'll get this stuff sorted out. If there's any issues, leave it in a comment in the video. Not only does that help the algorithm, but it also helps me to know what I could change to fix things and make it better for you. Of course, we are now at my favorite part of a video. This is the time where I get to tell you, if you didn't like anything that you saw in this video, then please just f*** off. Now I guess I probably should start printing some things in my new studio.